Hello, and welcome to today's podcast. The STEM Happens Network brings national expertise to schools and districts to create integrated STEM classrooms that will prepare students as citizens for today and the workforce of tomorrow. Remote learning is a process that takes existing tools and resources to provide rigorous and high-quality learning opportunities for students. Emphasis cannot just be placed on technology alone. It must also include rigorous content and the implementation of quality teaching and learning practices. The STEM Happens Network aims to take these best practices and models to help develop and replicate and create sustainable models. But we need your help in doing that. So we encourage you to help us form a learning community where we can share resources and tools and knowledge with one another, because there's not any one place that has all of the answers, but collectively we can really change the way that remote learning happens and work together. And we also think that there's some learning opportunities as well. So again, to start, I want to thank everyone for joining today. We're going to share various exemplars that have come from schools throughout the country on practices and ideas, and we're going to address your questions as well. I want to start by saying, unfortunately, Principal Polanco is unable to join us. However, as I mentioned, school happens, first of all, and secondly, we really are going to use this as an opportunity to take the learning and to start to answer some of those questions that are out there. So let's begin. The process for remote learning, it's not something that can just be turned off and turned on. It's something that we have to take that responsibility and put it all of us collectively and together. Just bear with me one moment here, because of course with technology, the slide does not want to move forward. There we go. So our agenda for today is that we're going to start by talking about the foundation for remote learning, the pathway to technology, professional development, and the role of leadership. Now, remote learning is not something that can be turned off and on. And remote learning isn't just sitting from the couch and having someone present the information to you. The foundation for remote learning has to include different levers, and it's difficult. School districts need to be prepared right now, and schools, for a longer than expected timeline, as well as the need to return to this model of learning on demand in the future. Remote learning cannot happen overnight or with just 1 or 2 days of planning. It needs to be embedded into the school culture during and after this current crisis. The purpose is to leverage this extensive experience as a way to better understand the process of providing high quality, rigorous remote learning. Remember, one size does not fit all, and it definitely takes time. As we start to go through this, there needs to be a basis there. Schools need to embrace the use of technology to transform teaching and learning, because our world has already evolved. We have seen technology and innovations keep happening in a rapid manner, but yet in our classrooms, we tend to keep it looking the same way. Technology can personalize learning. It can create ample opportunities for students to develop the 21st century skills needed to succeed in the careers of today and tomorrow. The hope is to nurture students' creativity and innovation while equipping them with the skills that someday will help solve some of the world's greatest challenges. Together, when a school team starts to take this approach of technology as a transformational learning tool, it ends up changing the culture and changing the way that students learn. We need to remember that this process takes time. Schools that are implementing technology already, they're a little bit ahead of the curve. In other cases, though, there's some catching up to do. That first and foremost, students must have access to the technology at home. They must have broadband and the ability to access it. However, there's some astounding facts that are out there. According to the Federal Communications Commission, approximately 19 million or 6% of Americans still lack access to broadband. The majority are in rural areas. However, even where broadband is available, many Americans do not subscribe. Therefore, without the basics being provided at home, remote learning is nearly impossible. And according to the Pew Research, 37% of Americans use a smartphone when accessing the internet. And these devices are increasingly cited as a reason for not having high-speed internet connection at home. And when we break that number down even further, with young adults, that number's greater than 58%. So broadband is decreasing due to costs, smartphone capabilities, and internet options outside of the home. Yet with remote learning, this is the basic assumption that just because students have the tool, the computer, the iPad, or the tablet, that they can complete their education work. The digital divide is not just about tools, but it's also about the internet capability, including the reliability of the internet and the ongoing technical support. So this is where our learning journey begins. The first step is yes, understanding the tools that are necessary. You have to have laptops and iPads, and you need headphones, and there's the keypads that you need as well. However, you need to start the process with a survey. The survey is not only for the students, but it's also for the families, because you have to have a deep understanding what are the concerns. So for example, when parents were surveyed about students receiving a laptop or an iPad or a tablet at home, many parents did not want to have that fiscal responsibility hanging over their head. And so it was key to understand that, and it led to the importance of ensuring that there's insurance on those laptops and iPads, and that there's a way to work with the students in case there is any damage. So then to begin with, I mentioned the headphones. There could be multiple people in the home. There could be multiple children in the home. You have to have a way that students can actually block out the sounds. So the headphones were essential. Again, as you survey the students, you have to understand what is their broadband capability at home. You need to ensure that every student has reliable internet at the home. And in order to ensure that, there's ways to develop partnerships to make sure that students actually have that opportunity. We've also found that schools also put in place tech support teams. The importance of this tech support team is to really address any of the challenges, to ensure that there's ongoing technical support for the students and their families with remote learning. But it's also important to make sure that the teachers have access to. They need a technical support team. One of the other things that's absolutely key to this is learning with and from each other. Educators teaching one another. That's what we need to remember, that during this process, everybody has some ideas and some things they can bring to the table, but we need to just ask those questions and create a learning culture that we learn with and from each other. Implementing the effective use of technology is you need to make sure that students have this whole digital platform around them. So at one school, and I'll give this an example because I had the opportunity to observe this at MS-80. They had two smart boards that were actually in the room. One was used as an interactive display to engage students, while the other smartboard had a full view of all of the students' laptop screens and allowed for many different ways in which students could share their work as well as make their process visible to their classmates. Students would open up their laptop, go to their digital workspace, and immediately engage with a challenge-based problem that the teacher had prepared and shared digitally. Again, that could be the do now. As students completed their challenge-based problem, the responses were made visible to the entire class in real time, both on the smartboard and on each student's screen. Students that had correct answers and the correct process, it was not just about the answer, it was also about the process. They moved on to the next differentiated task. Meanwhile, the students that displayed learning gaps were able to receive immediate interventions and supports to rework a similar problem. Teachers would use their iPads where they could access this real-time data and were able to assign work appropriate for each student's academic need. This personalized learning approach implemented at the school before the crisis occurred, it was easier for them to then shift to this remote learning process. One of the other areas that we want to make sure we talk about is that you have a large classroom and you might have 30 students that are in that classroom. It can be really challenging to be able to manage and to have an interaction. But one of the ways is to think about the learning cycle and think about how you can design that so it meets the needs of each student. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. So to begin with, students, again, as I mentioned, we have the iPad, we have the keyboard, the headphones, the tablet, the device. And you need to make sure there's unlimited data and the reliable internet. The next process that we have seen, that we have felt is a true best practice model, is where assignments are posted by 8 a.m. and they're due by 3:30 p.m. This provides a dedicated time slot for real in-depth learning. Instead of having assignments that are being due by 10 p.m. or midnight, that creates an environment where you feel you're doing school 24/7. But when you create a rigorous process of time between the hours of 8 to 3:30, it creates a sense of a school community, and it actually relieves some of that tension. And it allows for after the school day for life to continue as well. Another thing that was put into place was that all of the teachers, the paraprofessionals, the tutors, the out-of-classroom staff worked cohesively to sustain a high level of student engagement and support students in their daily assignments. So in this kind of process here, that you're not just relying only on the teacher. You're creating an environment where everybody is working and supporting the students, whether it's with nonprofit partners or out-of-school providers, or whether it's tutors or your paraprofessionals. It's creating that environment and a learning community that's supporting the student. Now, although there are assignments that are completed in every subject daily, each subject teacher facilitates the whole group with a live video conference session 3 times per week. So rather than when they were in school meeting 5 times, switching it to a 3 times per week. So this allows for students, for example, maybe they have math, English, and art via video conferencing on alternating days, while science, social studies, and physical education are held in group live sessions the other days. Teachers are able to use a scheduling digital tool to provide students with choice and flexible opportunities to meet individually or as a group. And in some cases, what we have also seen is when you have the whole group together, but creating these smaller learning environments can provide the tools for more engagement. The next step that I want to mention to this is that an excellent learning model is where all core subjects create a 2-week learning cycle at a minimum. It could be 4 weeks, but this is where, when you have these learning cycles, this is the ability that you're ensuring that students are engaged in rigorous content. That it's not just a learning cycle that has a bunch of templates and fill-in-the-blank sheets, but that it's really about mastery of the concept. So it would begin with an assessment process, what we like to call the baseline, or a pre-assessment of some sort. Then, as the students engage in the learning task and activities, they then can look at, have they mastered the content or not? If the student has mastered the content, they're able to move into multiple pathways. And once they've continued, they again have a midterm assessment, and then they have the mastery assessment. And this allows for teachers to be able to really have an understanding of where the students are. This is a model that MS-80 has used. They were using it prior to the remote learning, and now in the remote learning process, it has become an area that has really helped them to create a continuous learning cycle that is meeting the needs of each and every student. So how does this process look like? It's relatively simple. It's thinking about, what is the lesson plans and what do I have to cover? Starting with that baseline assessment, so you know right off the bat where your students are and how to begin to create that individualized lesson plan. You then begin to teach the content. You're going through that content. The students are engaging in rigorous activities that are thought-provoking, using and leveraging materials that you have, but now putting it in such a way that students have access to this in a different online learning platform. It's also thinking about making sure it's not just the entire class, having opportunity for small group discussions. As I mentioned before, in models where we've seen, it does not mean that all subjects have to be taught every single day. There can be assignments, of course. However, it's when you can have the smaller group discussions that create additional engagement opportunities. The other part, after you've had that mid-assessment, this is when it starts to move into, is it mastery? If it's mastery, then yes, the student can move on to the next topic. But if it's not mastery, this is where additional practice occurs. There's numerous tools that are out there. There's from IXL to Khan Academy to other platforms. But that should not be the only teaching. That doesn't replace the content of what the teachers are bringing to their students. That's enrichment. It enhances the learning. And that's what we have to remember in this process, is that there's still ways to use digital tools to actually get feedback from the students and to have a deeper understanding of how they are working. The other part that I want to make sure that we understand as we think about this learning cycle, that the tasks and activities are presented to each student and it illustrates multiple pathways. It's not a one-size-fits-all. And that's what's so important with remote learning. It cannot be one size fits all. What we need to look at, if a student understands the concept, they move on. But if the student does not fully understand the concept, we need to have strategies in place to continue for additional practice and learning so that it's a personalized path. Because when you're not in the room seeing the faces of the students, you don't always know if a child has mastered the concept or not. And that is why the baseline assessment, the mid-assessment, and the mastery assessment are so critical in this process here. I want to take a moment to talk to professional development for remote learning, because this has been a major adjustment for a lot of teachers out there. And it's difficult because in the classroom, many educators, that's the element. They love that. You feed off of that vibe from the students because you're in the room and you're having that interaction. Where it needs to start, again, I said this in the beginning, it's not a 1 or 2 day learning of the tools. This is an ongoing process. So to begin with, think about a boot camp for all of the staff. And when I say all staff, I mean all staff. The hardware, the software, the digital tools. Because the part we have seen where schools leverage their staff and all of their staff when they're created into various teams and they have different assignments. So people are going to have to wear multiple hats. Some may be very proficient in PowerPoint. Others may be very proficient in Excel tools. Others may be proficient in the hardware. It's, again, leveraging the expertise of all of the staff. And one way to also think about that is surveying your team, finding out what are the strengths, and then allowing for that staff member to be in charge or to be part of a team that supports the entire school community. There needs to be preparation for teachers and time to work in teams. So again, this may look very different. So the 1 week preparation simply lays a foundation that will be nurtured each day as staff members work in teams during their daily common planning time. Again, it's to continuously develop their craft. Teachers are using a wide range of technology as individual, grade level teams, and subject teams. So the philosophy employed is that we learn best by doing, by working in team collaborations, and by teaching one another. So teachers spend ample time in planning any of the anticipated misconceptions. What are some of the things that we think the students may not understand, and predetermine the appropriate interventions so that you're not going back and saying, I've moved 3-4 weeks down the road and now I'm finally realizing that the students didn't grasp the concept, or a subgroup of students didn't grasp the concept. This process allows for real-time instructional decisions and quality feedback loops that effectively close learning gaps and accelerate student learning. This continued professional development is something that needs to happen so that teachers are learning with and from each other. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in just one moment. But I first want to make this connection around taking attendance. Many districts right now are requiring attendance, and that is where a student may just email the teacher, but that is not what remote learning is about. High quality remote learning evaluates the completion of work. It's not just the worksheet. It's not just going on to some program and putting in time. It is about thought-provoking and challenging work. And that's what we need to make sure that our students are getting that opportunity there. And that is how we learn with and from each other, because continued professional development is focused on mastering the content, understanding the standards related to the content, and developing a strong set of pedagogical practices that are aligned to the school's philosophy and the culture of learning. Developmentally, and once there is mastery of the content, this is when the focus shifts to integration across the content area. Right now, what has happened when we have shifted to this remote learning process, we have gone back into our silos of education. We've gone back into that comfortable zone to teach topics one subject at a time. But what we need to get to is a place that is integrated across the content areas, having students think about real-world problems and how they can solve that. Taking this where there is this collaboration, where students are thinking about what I learned in science, how does that provide to math? How does that provide, influence the literacy and the social studies? How do you bring that learning together? And this is where, if we go back and we think about creating those cycles of learning, this is an area that teachers can collaborate, create a cycle of learning that encompasses all of the subject areas and not getting back into that traditional siloed approach there. I want to also talk about leadership, because leadership is extremely important and it is essential in remote learning. Every day there needs to be phone, video conference calls, ongoing coordination, reviews of digital learning spaces, and planning sessions. The leadership team as well as with the staff members. So again, from in the morning to the late afternoon, before, during, and after the structured remote learning day, teachers, staff, teams are coming together. Where we have seen, again, in exemplars, where teachers are provided with a checklist and the leadership team is reviewing the digital learning spaces, they're looking at the students' tasks and assignments, and they're providing ongoing feedback and support. This is new for so many that we have to work together. So all of this work extends to paraprofessionals, tutors, the out-of-classroom staff as well. Even though maybe previously teachers were collaborating and planning, but under the current conditions right now, there needs to be at least one meeting a week for interdisciplinary grade level planning and one meeting a week for content planning. All meetings must have an agenda. There has to be protocols, and digital minutes should be submitted as soon as the meeting concludes. The meeting minutes are submitted by the team's recorder and are immediately received by the leadership team to review, and in some cases respond with immediate support when necessary. This is essential. Again, checklists for teachers, the ongoing feedback and support, the meeting minutes. And if there is a problem or a challenge, it should be captured in the meeting minutes so there can be further discussions. Because if you're meeting as a team, a content planning team, for example, well, maybe another content planning team is having a similar issue. There has to be a level of transparency that really brings this together for everyone. I want to say, and I'm going to go to some of the questions here, but in summary, remote learning is a process. It requires ample planning, preparation, and sustainable implementation. It involves a set of plans for adult learning. You have to manage the technology, and there has to be a clear vision set by the school's leadership. Once you have, and only once, all of those things are in place, is when the curriculum can be implemented using a variety of digital platforms. Again, I apologize that we did not have Principal Polanco with us today, because he is an exemplar. MS-80 is an exemplar in Bronx, New York, of doing this kind of remote learning here. We will continue to provide tools and resources. If you visit the STEM Happens Network site, you'll see that we're building this remote learning community, and we're trying to share various tools and resources, things that have come from NASA. There is an astronaut program. They have a video chat for students, a live video chat every Tuesday at 9 a.m. Again, I want to go back and say one of the most important steps in this is surveying your student community and their families. This is how we need to start. A couple other questions that did come up that I wanted to just take a moment to address some of these, but we're also going to share this again on the STEM Happens Network platform. There's a variety of websites and tools that are out there. We're trying to take the ones that really make the most sense, that are of high quality. And again, if you have tools and resources to share, please pass that information along. So one of the questions that came up is, how much should you target in one class compared to a normal class? And again, if you're thinking about this, in the model that we talked about, they're meeting in person 3 times per week as a whole class. And when you have learning cycles that are created in chunks, it's certainly more manageable. And the other part that I think is equally important to this process here is the fact that we're also taking a look at smaller learning communities. Again, that can be either the teacher working with a small group, it could be individualized learning, or it could also be students creating their own student learning group. So again, thinking about that. Another question that came up is, how do we make it easier for teachers who don't necessarily feel comfortable with online teaching skills? This is a challenge here, but this is where teachers learn from other teachers. It's that teacher-to-teacher coaching, and it needs to be established. So even if you have one teacher that is feeling really confident and is loving this, there's other teachers out there that are not. And that is the role that schools and districts need to help these systems to create these buddy systems, because there's no one that you can learn more from than from a fellow colleague. That is essential there too. I also, you know, when students aren't keeping up and they're not logging in and they're not seeing their assignments, this goes back to creating that culture where everybody is tracking down the students. So whether it's the paraprofessionals, the tutors, or other members of the school community, there needs to be a group and a way to reach them. And models that we've seen that have worked best is where a staff member, whether it's the teacher, maybe it's administrative support, maybe it's the tutor, maybe a paraprofessional, but that team is responsible for no more than 10 students. And that means you have, that individual is responsible for those connections and having that conversation with whether it's the student or the parent. There also needs to ensure that you have updated information on every single child, that there is a way to text the parents as well as the student. So again, if a student is falling through the cracks, there is the ability to make sure that the parent, the family, the caregiver, that their connection for that student is contacted and they're in place. Again, you know, the pitfalls to watch out for, the number one thing is to survey. Survey the students, survey the families, survey the staff. Learn what is going on. Understanding and developing cycles of learning. Having a platform that every student is very, very clear on, this is that cycle of learning. And thinking about the pre, the during, the post assessment, how to ensure mastery. Again, it's not strictly about the attendance, it's about the content. And you also want to make sure that you're using programs that really have that ability to develop the child, to help them think about things that are project, problem, or phenomenon-based learning. Think about ways that you can get out of your silos and go back to creating this integration where students have this rigorous quality learning environment. Again, there are ways to conduct hands-on activities, and we are posting and sharing those resources on our website. Again, if you visit the STEM Happens Network, you'll see some resources there, but what we want to say is this goal of ours is to create a collaborative culture of learning. It is not to remain stagnant. It is that we need information from you. If you see or you know of best practice models, we want you to share them with us. Because again, we want to create this learning community, and collectively together, we want to think about how do then we as a whole become an exemplar for others around the country. I also want to make sure that when there are meetings, think about this level of transparency. There was a question that had actually come up about how you would hold, how do you observe teachers, the instruction of teachers. And again, this is through the minutes, through student grades book, participating in online classes conducted by the teacher. There's a variety of ways to still make school feel like school. And I think one of the models that we have seen that works best is when the remote learning, it's like a job. It's thinking of those hours of 8 to 3:30 for students. It keeps things, because right now, I think all of us can say, when you go to a remote learning environment, it feels like it's 24/7. And we need to put some boundaries in place so that the learning environment has some set capacity there, that teachers are accessible during that period of time, that students are expected to be there. And when you create that kind of solid structure there, and it's not opened up to being from 8 a.m. to midnight, that is when the students attend and they participate, and you start to see that content occur. I know today we wanted to have more information there. We're going to continue to share these resources. School happens, so we do apologize that Principal Polanco could not be with us today. However, we do hope that you found some of this information helpful. And again, we want to create a learning environment that is for all of us. And again, we need the resources from you, and we want to hear more information there. So again, I've answered some of the questions that we have received here. We're going to continue to post them. We're talking, everything from metrics to using data to inform instructions. But if you think about all of these things, this is where it really can be helpful and beneficial to you. And again, having that deep understanding. And before we went into this remote learning, teachers, you know your kids. And so you need to think, gosh, if they were sitting here in my classroom, how do I have them now sit here with us virtually? I want to thank you for joining today's webinar. Again, we apologize that it was a little briefer than what we would like, but we encourage you to continue to check out our other webinars. Also, I want to remind everyone too, that this summer we will be hosting through the STEM Leadership Alliance a virtual summit. We're going to have presenters from around the world talking about virtual and remote learning. For example, we have Dr. Levitt, the author of Freakonomics, which will be a fascinating insight as we think about the economics and how things have changed. We have Barbara Morgan, the astronaut, and Steve Swanson, the astronaut, that'll be joining us as well. We have many members from NASA that'll be participating, but again, this is going to be an opportunity for all of us to share. So with that, I want to thank everyone, and if you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we'll be providing some additional learning opportunities in the near future. So with that, thank you.